Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Blether Together. My name is Stephen Paton. I'm here from The National, and joining me today is Angela Haggerty from Common Space. So, we're going to be talking about news, everything that's happened.
It's been a quiet week.
Yeah, not much has happened.
Yeah.
We're going to be having a chat about the news and everything else that's been going on over the last week. So, as always, we do want to hear your comments as well, so please do leave them down below. We will be watching and reading out any questions you've got, and a couple of thoughts as well. So, kicking things off. What's been going on, Angela?
That's a good way to put it, kicking things off.
Yeah, it does feel like things are currently kicking off just a little bit.
There was a little election over the water, and we are now graced with the presence of President Donald Trump.
Yep, President Donald Trump.
It's not any less weird saying that, President
And
Donald Trump.
It still feels a little bit surreal all round. To think that someone who's
It's
basically a reality
shockwaves.
TV star is now going to be the leader of the free world.
Shockwaves. Still hitting me in waves, I think. Still keep suddenly going, did that really happen? Yeah, I mean, it is unprecedented. I'm sick of saying that word this year. I'm so sick of it. But it is. He was the outsider. It was never supposed to happen. People wrote it off smugly. They were complacent because of that. And he's done it. And I think that what you have to do is strive to understand just exactly how and why that happened.
Yeah, and I think it's the same. I mean, I think there's a lot of similarities between Trump's presidency and Brexit in a lot of ways, which was basically that it wasn't going to happen. All the polls seemed to say it wasn't going to happen. And at the same time, there was this framing of it as in elites on one side and this revolution coming out from the other side that's trying to overthrow, I guess, more established things. And I mean, I think a lot of people might have looked at Clinton, and if you're talking about a dynasty, I mean, America's been run by the same families for decades now, whether it was the Bushes or the Clintons, and I can see why people might have wanted to go for the outside candidate. It's just, maybe after listening to Trump for a little bit, I can see it a little bit less. But definitely the idea of trying to challenge established power, I think was definitely a theme that ran through both Brexit and Trump's presidency.
Yeah, I mean, Bernie Sanders pointed to this in his statement yesterday that he put out. And I think that there's been a gross underestimation of the working classes. And that happened in Brexit as well. And it's not just an underestimation, it's misunderstanding of them. And there's a lot of reasons I think that's happened. One is a big failure on the part of the media. I think it's really exposed that. And it's exposed the disconnection, not just from the media, but from that kind of mainstream establishment politics. And someone said to me on Twitter yesterday that it felt to them like 2016 was the fallout from 2008, from the banking crisis. And it feels a little bit like that. And it's actually come a little bit earlier than I might have thought, and it's just happened in a different form. I think a lot of people maybe just made a kind of assumption in 2008 that corrupt bankers, etc., eventually the people are going to wake up to this. They're going to wake up to this corrupt system. They're going to wake up to these capitalists and elitists and these career politicians, and they're going to fight back. I think the left mistakenly assumed that would go in a left direction and sort of waited for the people to wake up. Meanwhile, the right was mobilising. The outsider, the alternative, the fight back has fallen entirely towards the right. I think they've taken advantage of that discontent, that growing discontent, that I don't think the media has paid enough attention to and portrayed well enough. There's a lot of things that have been done wrong, a lot of things that have been highlighted that don't work. What we are seeing as a result of all of that, and it would be a big mistake to just keep screaming racist and misogynist at the problem. And we've done that with Brexit as well.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you mostly there. I mean, definitely when it came to Brexit, I think there was definitely that dismissal of it was racism or anything else, when in fact I think it really is more the case of people just didn't know necessarily what to do to change the system. That I think, again, you're right, that 2008 happened and was never really resolved, and they saw a potential way out of that, and that's where we, I guess, got to with that. But I think the distinction is that when looking at America, if you are looking at some of the breakdowns of people who voted, yeah, there was a swing towards Donald Trump in working class communities, but actually, it's still a majority of them voted for Clinton. Mm-hmm. It was the upper class vote. It was the people with money who voted for Trump that ultimately secured his presidency.
But I think the swing is still important.
The swing is still important.
It's just that does mean something. But
it does mean something because it's one of the biggest swings as well. But again,
it
wasn't enough.
It's not easy to explain this just looking at it on an income basis. You know, this is where race plays a much more major role, particularly with American history and politics. Even though that is part of the Brexit issue as well, but I think that there is a much more deep-rooted kind of thing going on in America. But gender as well came into that, and I think one of the things that's annoyed me a little bit on social media when seeing people talking about gender and how women vote, and I think there's a real oversimplification about how women vote. There's an assumption that a woman will vote for Hillary Clinton because she's a woman. Women don't think like that.
No, and there is always that generalisation of trying to take any, whether women or any minority, and put them into a homogenous blob of, all these people will just vote the same because X.
Yeah, and because Donald Trump is a misogynist, women will vote against him. That's not the case. Women are not necessarily, this is going to sound silly, but they're not necessarily born feminist. Women are born into a system where there have been structures and constructs that have traditionally held them down in a variety of ways, and from it's on a spectrum. There are less extremes and there are very big extremes of that. But one of the results that you get from that is a kind of internalised misogyny. Sometimes we hear people talk about this, women are often more destructive towards each other than you would think, or than they should be. There's a reason that happens, and that the same reason is a reason why women don't necessarily just turn to Hillary Clinton because she's a woman, and the rhetoric of this is your time, this is the time for women, doesn't necessarily always speak to them. Feminism is a complex thing. Women are very complex, and the issues that we're trying to figure out are continuing. And I don't like this generalisation about the breakdown about the way women vote. It completely excludes every other motivating factor for a woman as well, which I think is quite ignorant. So we have had polls that have been wrong, assumptions that have been wrong, and there is a pattern going on. It did not just happen in Brexit, it now happened in the US as well, on a different continent. We need to learn from that. We need to learn what that means, and we need to learn quickly, because there is so much at stake. Yeah. It's really, I find it difficult sometimes to believe that I'm sitting talking about these things and having these conversations. There is so much at stake. But I do still have a lot of optimism, a lot of positivity. Yes, we're going to have a President Trump, but Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. Mm-hmm. And people have pointed, Michael Moore, the filmmaker, who predicted that Trump would win, and Michael Moore would be very much on the left. He's not a Trump supporter by any means, but he predicted correctly that Trump would win, and he put out a 5-point list yesterday, an action plan for people for the left to respond. And he pointed out that Clinton won the popular vote, which means America is not this raging, racist, misogynistic society necessarily in the way that people now feel like it is. There are a lot, millions and millions of people who are fighting against it, who reject that. That's what you need to work with now. You need to mobilise. It's the same with Brexit. Brexit wasn't that clear cut. It was, 52% to 48%?
Like 51.8 or something.
Yeah, it's not like the vast majority of people in Britain are xenophobic or misogynist or all those other things. That's not the case. No. And I don't necessarily think that everyone that voted for Trump is a racist or a misogynist either. I think sometimes these people are desperate and they respond to someone who tells them that they're going to make everything different. It can be as simple as that allows them to kind of overlook some of those other character traits that Trump showed. So I have optimism that that things feel terrible right now, but there is a lot to work with there. The challenge is now that for people on the left, for politicians on the left, they have got to mobilise, they've got to do it quickly. Arguably, though, that's already started. Bernie Sanders very nearly won against Clinton for the nomination. Had he won that, I think we would be looking at a President Sanders now. There's a good chance, because he could have taken on Trump's anti-establishment rhetoric and really shown it up.
I suspect that's true as well, although I think I do agree as well with a lot of people saying, oh, if it had been Sanders, things would have been different. It's not really, I guess, helpful for a lot of people in America right now.
No, but the fact that it's realistic to say that. So, we're talking about the hard right, the far right is winning, but the far left, we call it the far left, but Sanders could have won that just as easily as well. It's not necessarily about right and left right now. We're still framing it that way. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's actually quite the right way to look at it.
There were a lot of people who really interested in saying that they were going to vote for Bernie Sanders, and if it wasn't going to be Bernie, it was going to be Trump.
Yep.
Which sounds kind of mad if you're approaching it from the Democrat-Republican side, but if you're focusing in on the fact that it's people who have become disenfranchised with the system, actually it makes a lot of sense that you're going to go for the candidate who's going to try and fix what you see as being this big problem. Coming back to actually the whole electoral college system, so obviously for anyone who doesn't really know, America has a system called the electoral college system, which is how the presidency is selected. Mm-hmm. And Hillary Clinton got the popular vote, which is, again, it's a positive thing. It means that people didn't vote for this kind of problematic character.
Again, was tight, but the majority.
It was tight. The majority was still there. But if you look online, you can still find all of Donald Trump's tweets from the last time that happened, where he called it like a democratic outrage that someone could be elected as the president when they did not, in fact, have the popular vote. So there is like a really beautiful thing there, which I hope people just start sharing this with him every time, where he talks about having a mandate to get away with, I suppose, really whatever they want. So coming over to some of the comments coming in, we have, I had a second ago and it's gone now. People wondering why they believe that the Trump candidate and Trump president are going to be two very different people, since, of course, his rhetoric throughout the entire campaign was very negative, and then as soon as he got it, he seemed to have a very measured speech, which I think was clearly not written by himself. And it's gone now, but there was somebody talking about how some of the minorities in America are probably feeling at this moment in time. And I think what we're talking about, there are positives that the left might be able to use this to get itself together. Mm-hmm. And then there are really, really big challenges that America is going to face right now. So, for example, like the environment is a really interesting one. That's not something that's going to affect America. That's going to affect the world, because Donald Trump has already, I mean, other than the fact that in the past he voiced that he thought climate change was made up by the Chinese to undermine US markets, he's now appointed a massive climate change skeptic to the head of, I think, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. I mean, he's going to go full ahead with fracking, he's going to go full ahead with coal, so much so that right after once he'd become announced as going to be the next president, the share prices of coal companies in America skyrocketed. And climate change is not something that stops at your border. Mm-hmm. That's something that pollution and change like that is going to sweep across the entire world. And if America just fires ahead with whatever it wants for 4 years, that's the kind of thing where, I mean, I don't know if we can come back from that as a planet with 4 years of just completely unrestricted climate change from such a large country in the world. That in itself is something that environmentalists in America are going to have to face, and they're going to have to very much unite and begin to fight back on. Equally, looking at LGBTQ plus communities. I mean, Mike Pence, the vice president, who actually not many people have been talking about as much because Trump is the bigger character, but I mean, Mike Pence is someone who has been very vocal about believing in conversion theory, that you can teach people to not be gay, and that is horrifying in itself. And basically, I mean, the two of them together represent, Trump and Pence, represent like an assault on the environment, on people of colour, LGBTQ plus communities, women. Like, these groups of people will have to begin to build a solid fight back. Otherwise, they're going to find themselves, I think, in a position that they're going to have their rights eroded away from them, and they're going to be in an even worse position than they are just now in a country that already is pretty sceptical about things like Planned Parenthood. Trump's talking about defunding it. Like, if anything positive can come from it, it is people seeing that now is the time to actually organise efficiently and do something. There's
no doubt the next 4 to 5 years, at least, for those communities in America are going to be very difficult. There's no doubt about that. Likewise, on climate change, when everyone got up yesterday morning and realised Trump had been elected, I noticed everyone's sharing images of nuclear bombs and going on about the codes and all this stuff. And yes, well, that's something I'm sure many people worry about. Actually, climate change, I would be very worried about that.
That's one of the things that's definitely stuck with me very
I would be less
intensely.
worried right now about nuclear weapons, and I would be more worried about that. Because as Stephen's saying, you know, erosions to rights can be reversed. It can be reversed. In 4 or 5 years, it could be a really nasty time. But if that's the only term that he gets, if America goes back to Democrats or goes to something else entirely, those things can be changed. Progress can be made again. Climate change doesn't work like that. And I've heard people talking about whether is there any possibility that other countries could look at sanctions, could look at some other kind of political response to the US if they very strongly go down that road. I don't know. I don't know how exactly that works. What I also don't know, being based in Scotland and speaking primarily about Scottish politics, is I don't understand the American political system well enough. People do keep saying that you know, the American Constitution and system was built for people like Donald Trump. It was built in such a way that people, you know, the maniacs, if you like, couldn't just come in and do whatever they like. There are a lot of other structures in the way of that you have to get through. So I wonder whether minority groups and other politicians, campaign groups, anybody in America can look at all of those other structures that exist and whichever ways possible that they can use them to try and defend themselves to the best that they can. But again, I don't know enough about those structures to know exactly the technicals of how you would do that. But I think, you know, everyone is feeling very despondent right now and feeling like that these people are going to get in and they're going to do whatever they like, and it's going to, you know, real despair. I think it's important to, yes, you have to feel that, but then realise that you have got to get back up and you've got to keep going. That's more important now than it's ever been.
Yeah, people definitely need to focus on positives. I mean, that was one of the things that Barack Obama was criticised for, of not being able to get things through because there were these institutions in place already. I think the difference is that this time the Republicans actually do hold literally every position, and it's going to be so much easier to get that through. Plus, I mean, when you're dealing with Trump, who seems to be a bit of an egomaniac and a megalomaniac, he absolutely is, those things. I mean, the powers that the president has in America are actually, with the characters maybe a little bit unrestrained, quite worrying, like the ability to detain somebody without giving a reason why. And just for starters, I mean, I can imagine Trump well enough, just like, I don't like you, given the way he spoke at some of his
I don't know.
rallies.
I mean, to come back to that first question about Trump the president and Trump the man, Trump was pretty much completely inconsistent throughout his entire campaign.
Yeah.
I think that Trump is a businessman. He's someone who is not an idiot, despite the kind of buffoon image that has been portrayed of him. He's clearly not stupid to be where he is right now. He done what he had to do to win that campaign. He told everyone, as many people as he could, what they wanted to hear, and that didn't put him off contradicting himself in order to do that. He done what he needed to do to get the votes. I think we're now going to see a different Donald Trump. He's got the votes. He has the power. And I think we're going to see a change in the tone. I think we're going to see a change in the rhetoric. And I don't think it's going to be anything like as erratic as we've already seen, because I suspect that there was a method to that madness, if that's the way to put it.
Yeah,
or
he definitely was playing the card
madness
of
was the
populism.
method. Yeah, so I think that Trump the man and Trump the president may well be quite different things. I also think that Trump the president is going to be surrounded by a lot of people who have actually been in the political game for a long time. He's going to be surrounded by advisors. He's going to be, you know, it's not just giving this guy who's never held public office the keys and leaving him to it. It doesn't quite work like that, and I think people are getting very, very worked up and frightened about things that are probably quite unlikely and unrealistic at the moment. They're seeing total worst-case scenarios everywhere, and I think that's actually distracting from the people that actually are going to get hurt the most here, most likely, and that is those minority groups in America. People often, I think, forget a little, not forget, but I think sometimes you're kind of prioritising what this might mean for you. And I think, and at least this could mean a lot less for us. We don't know how anything's going to play. We don't know how the international politics of this are going to play out yet. it's definitely going to mean something for those people, though.
Yeah,
that's
sure.
Who are
hit the most with it, and definitely I think it is those communities that are the ones who are genuinely scared right now.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I mean, more than that as well, if we're talking about those communities, there's been a lot on social media basically following it day one of Trump, and it's actually really terrifying. Like, there's people been sharing photos of folk flying Nazi flags in their homes. There's footage of people walking through a high school with a Trump sign chanting "White Power." Like, I mean, these are maybe isolated incidents, but I mean, there seems to be enough of them going on all over the place. It has that same feeling as right after Brexit, where even if that's not why people voted for Brexit, it still handed bigots an opportunity to feel like their beliefs were vindicated and that people agreed with them, and the opportunity to go out and express themselves in a way that they maybe had not felt like they had to or could before. And that in itself is worrying too, even like not just in America itself where that's happening right now, and there's a lot of problems happening right now as a result of just the announcement that Trump has taken the presidency, even though he's not had it yet. But I mean, looking out globally and global politics wise, after Trump was it was announced that he was going to be president, you had Israeli ministers saying that Trump's presidency was essentially the permission to end the Palestinian state. There was no need to continue it on anymore. I mean, I wonder what globally people are looking at Trump going, well, you know what, there you go, leader of the free world, big important position. If they're wanting to start to see this kind of change, then we can start shifting in that direction as well. It came off the back of Brexit too. I felt like a lot of people in Europe were possibly looking over to the UK and seeing that sort of shift, and I wondered what they were thinking, and now it's happened again with the US elections. I don't know if we're going to see what the actual fallout of a country that has with a lot of influence around the world, making that decision. I don't know where that's going to go globally, and that does worry me a little bit too.
Well, I mean, I think it should worry everyone, but I think we also need to accept that these events have happened for a reason. These events have happened because people have been marginalised, they've felt powerless, they've been struggling with poverty, with austerity. These things have happened for a reason. People are angry, and they're right to be angry, even if it's manifesting itself in these ways. And yeah, well, we have these isolated incidents. I still don't think that necessarily represents a majority view. I think you can still fight that. I think you can work with progressively minded people, and I think there are plenty of minds out there that can be changed. But you have to give them something to change them for. You have to give them another option. Give them another way, and that has been lacking. There hasn't been enough of a vision. And I said earlier on that we keep talking about how the left has to mobilise. If we keep thinking about it, even in terms of right and left, we're still framing it that way. I wonder whether at some point that in itself might change somehow. But Bernie Sanders was, now I think we can all say in hindsight, he was probably a lot closer to the presidency than anybody thought he was. You looking at the way that this was played out, I think everyone can kind of say that quite confidently. Maybe in the UK, given the fact that Bernie Sanders was written off, polls probably wouldn't have been in his favour, who knows. The media didn't have much truck with him. It reminds me of someone else. It reminds me a little bit of Jeremy Corbyn. It reminds me a little bit of the Momentum movement. We have him being written off. We're told it's not possible. Same with Trump even. Yeah. It's not possible for... And in terms of this, think of Trump and Sanders as being the same rather than opposites. They were the same in that they were the outsiders. And what are we told? They'll never win it. They can't be elected.
That's all that's been
They're
happening.
not part of that established thing. So that's not going to happen. And the crowds that they're bringing out... is written off, it's dismissed. Corbyn's been able to do that in the UK. And the journalists that actually go to these things, rather than writing about them from afar, people that I've spoken to that have been there have said that it has felt like something else. And that's not necessarily coming across in reporting of these things. No. So everyone's feeling really despondent about it. I'm not convinced that... I think that there are other places that you can look at to say there is an alternative mobilising. It's not going to necessarily get the media coverage that it might deserve, and I think that we're kind of seeing that in the outsider behaviour from the media.
Yeah, there's a problem with this idea of unelectability, and it was the same with Corbyn, and it's the same with Sanders as well. And it does feel like, I mean, I think it's really interesting if you look back, I guess, from when advertising first started to come into politics. just specifically in Britain, and how that started to change the dynamic of how people approached elections and campaigning. And at the very beginning, Labour were really bad at it because they believed that the message of what they were selling in terms of their politics was enough. And the Conservatives come in and they just hired a bunch of people and then they won because suddenly their message was everywhere and everyone could see it. Mm-hmm. And I think since that started, we have had this gradual move away from policy to come in more and more and more into this idea of selling a brand, and campaigning is like almost like a way of just getting people to do what you want rather than getting them inspired in what you're trying to do in terms of politics. And it's the same with like the whole thing of like taking like focus groups into like how you present a policy, or focus groups and how you present a candidate. And it has created this culture where you do have things where like, oh, well, you're just not electable because we ran a focus group on you and that's it. It doesn't matter if your politics are good. And out they go. And in fact, I think what we really need to be doing is people have gotten so tired of that approach to politics and that approach to how we run things, this whole soundbite culture where all we need is like a quick snippet and then just go away from it. I think that's at least part as well of like where this rebellion is coming from too, is that people look at established politicians, people look at established campaigns, and all they see is this like false front that's been put up to try and essentially win a campaign. And then on the other hand, you've got this outsider who's just coming into it with this like weirder, different message, and people want to get behind that, even if, again, with Trump, the message happens to be kind of terrible.
Yeah,
I understand that. I understand that frustration. Like, it is very frustrating. And it's angering for a lot of people to feel like that politics has just become a sham. I get why people disengage with the system completely. Yeah. And looking at even votes in America, where something like 49% of registered voters didn't even vote in this election, because who could you have voted for? I mean, okay, obviously quite sad. Clinton was probably better than Trump, but at the same time, well, it's still a problematic candidate.
I think Clinton was the continuity candidate, and she would have carried this on, but she would have kicked it down the line a little bit. But this was still going to happen, because that rejection of that type of politics is already well underway. If Clinton had just sort of pipped it, I don't think that would actually have fixed this at all. No. And who knows what might have followed Trump as the alternative. So, everyone's upset that Trump won. That's understandable. Clinton having won might have made me feel a little bit better, because you didn't have to deal with a President Trump. But it wouldn't have fixed it, and you would have still have known that there was going to be trouble on the horizon because of this situation that we find ourselves in. So, I think the challenge for the left now, I think it has to get itself together, and it has to sort out its priorities as well. I think that's a big thing. I think it has to realise exactly what is it trying to fight for and what really matters now, because there's a lot of what I consider to be quite kind of more petty bickering that goes on continually within the left, splits all the time, factions, fallouts. That has got to stop. It really has got to stop. And we're going to see in time exactly how that plays out. The other interesting aspect of all of this is, what does it mean for Scotland? What's Scotland's relationship going to be like with President Trump? Because our elected politicians and party leaders have been very scathing of him. But he does have pre-existing links with Scotland that he doesn't have with a lot of other countries in the world, which actually kind of makes us a bit unusual. Yeah, I mean, yes, and some of us would like to pretend that wasn't necessarily the case, but it is. Actually, one of the few things I did enjoy about Trump's presidency, very few, was the Buchan Observer or Guardian, basically trying to find a local angle in the story, as always. And they were just it was a local business owner wins presidential election. It was their headline to cover the next morning. I was like, yeah, fair play. I can get behind that. That's quite enjoyable. But you're right. Like we have had pretty much leaders of all the parties, including the Conservatives, come out and call Trump pretty nasty things, and it seems like they've all reversed that position a little bit. Like Sturgeon came out and congratulated Trump, but said that he still needed to reach out. Ruth Davidson essentially said a very similar thing of, it's not the result we would have wanted, but we have to accept it, and everything else. In fact, I think the only kind of party leader or convener who has stood by that position is within the Greens, Patrick Harvey, still sharing exactly what he thinks about Donald Trump. And I might be controversial here, but I don't think that's appropriate, because he is now the elected leader of the United States of America, and he is not just Donald Trump, his own man, anymore. He's now the representative of millions of people. And you have got to take your own personality out of that equation. You've got to take your own personal likes and dislikes out of that equation and deal with all of this now on a very different level. Nicola Sturgeon realises that. He's seen that in the tone of her statement yesterday, although I think she was quite pointed again in First Minister's questions today. But I think what gets me a little bit is that it almost feels like there was a little bit of political immaturity there. Because when you're talking about, Scotland might not be an independent country yet, but should it become one, then it has to get better at international relations and diplomacy. And to me, that doesn't include lashing out at someone that you don't like and calling them names. That's not a professional way to do business, and I think it's not a healthy way to do it either. If you start out from that position, it gets very difficult to move to other positions. It gets difficult to manoeuvre elsewhere, and it gets harder to tell when you're actually changing your rhetoric on something. That's why diplomacy is such a guarded thing, because reading between the lines, diplomatic correspondence can tell you from a statement what exactly this tells you about a government's position, the change of language, a change of tone. And when things escalate, when countries have disagreements with each other, that language escalates quite slowly because it gives it a lot of space to go for you to realise quite how serious that situation's getting. So language is actually very, very important when it comes to diplomacy and international relations. And I think that maybe, if you look at the way that other world leaders, and perhaps Trump is a bit of an exception here because he was such an outsider and so many people expected him not to win, it seemed quite safe to bash him. But, still, though, if you look at other elected leaders and the way that they dealt with this, it's really quite different, and I think that there's a reason for that. So I don't know whether there's maybe some political lessons to be learned for some of Scotland's politicians.
I disagree with you on this one, because I think that just by dint of becoming the president does not actually wipe the slate clean in terms of how you actually behave during the campaign and everything else. And I think still having a spoken, almost like the washing away of sins by taking on the presidential thing, I think is problematic as well, because it almost says, well, you're president now, therefore you can get away with it. It's the same. It's the same way that this rape trial against him has suddenly just been dropped.
But I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that you forgive the sins and wipe the slate clean and pretend none of this ever happened. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is how you deal with that politically becomes important, and your approach to that becomes important. That doesn't mean forgive and forget. It doesn't mean excuse. It doesn't mean accept. It means that you have to get smart about how you deal with that, and you have to be able to carry authority in what you're saying. And I think if you're seen to be the type of person that lashes out, in much the same way that Trump has done, I think that there's an issue with that. I don't think that that's a good way necessarily for countries to do business when there's very much on the line there. So it's not about forgetting anything, I don't think, and it's not about forgiving anything that Trump has previously said. Angela Merkel's statement pointed at that. She made it quite clear that they were willing to work with the USA. They have to. A lot of countries still have got to work with the USA because they have relations, and that is a country of millions of people, and not all of which voted for Donald Trump. Actually, only about 25% of them did. To shun Donald Trump is almost, because of what his position represents, is almost like shunning all of those people as well. There are other ways to look at this. It's not just about him anymore. And I think that the way that gets dealt with by political leaders, that needs to be quite clever. They have to get that quite right. And I just don't think that, calling to shun someone is necessarily, it's not going to change it either, is another thing. It's not actually going to make it much of a difference other than for us to say that we're very moral. But I just don't know. It just strikes the wrong tone with me.
Yeah. So that brings us really to the end of this week's show. Would like to just share one last thing, so we can end it on a slightly more amusing note.
Yay.
Which is
there has been a lot of funnies.
There has been a lot of funnies, which we haven't really gotten
into. Some great tweets.
There has been some great tweets.
My favourite one, I think, was the one about John McTernan, who has now lost elections on 3 continents. I thought that was quite funny.
Yeah, it's wherever he goes, it's just a disaster.
And everyone blaming it on Kezia Dugdale. Yeah. Because she went to campaign. She really can't catch a break, can she?
No. Actually, the part I enjoyed the most with John McTernan was not only the fact that he went there and then this happened, but that specifically he tweeted that he'd arrived in one specific state And then 2 days later, that state swung from Hillary to Trump. It's like, McTernan, stop! just go be in a cave and stop damaging the world, please. Yeah.
There's been a lot of predictions coming back to haunt people. That's always kind of fun. This is why I shy away from making all these big predictions on Twitter, because inevitably someone screen grabbed it.
Yeah. Oh, I knew it was going to be Trump. Just the way that 2016 was going, it's like, of course it will be.
I thought
it couldn't go any other way.
I thought 2016 might come through and do something a little bit unexpected, but no.
Yep.
Right on cue. President Trump.
Actually, my next tattoo is going to be based around remembering when 2016 was a sweeter, more ridiculous time. But we'll go into that in another show. Maybe once I've got it, I'll show it off.
So what was our funny?
The funny is that, when I say funny, it's a serious thing, obviously. But California is currently discussing leaving America, just succeeding into its own country. And it's large enough. It's bigger than the UK, I think. So, I mean, it could definitely function in its own country. But the campaign for it, interestingly, is called Yes, California. In fact, if you look
looks familiar.
Yeah, it does look quite familiar. So there we go. They've just adopted the Yes Scotland logo into the Yes California logo. Remember, what's a wee bit closer look? There we are.
Is that really Californians, or is that Scottish nationalists taking the mickey?
No, it's real, and they're out on the streets campaigning for it right now to try and leave, and it's going to go to a vote.
Yeah.
It's actually going to go to a vote.
They can come over here. What was it? Angry Salmon tweeted something about how we could make Giffnock the new celeb hotspot.
Giffnock.
Yeah.
I mean, of all places, why not Giffnock? But yeah, so that's actually happening. That's the weirdest thing. That's actually going to go to a vote, and then who knows?
Well, that gives me that is a nice thing, because it shows you that there is a strength of feeling very much in the other direction among a lot of people.
Yeah.
So you absolutely cannot lose hope. You have to keep going.
We've got to keep going, all round. Mm-hmm. And a slightly more uplifting note, we'll end the show there. So thank you everyone for watching. Please do leave any feedback or comments down below. We do read everything, even the mean things. Mm-hmm. Looking at you. You know who you are.
We've gone through enough this week.
It's been such a hard week. I'm just looking forward to my bed. Yeah. So yeah, thank you for watching. We'll be back next week at 3 p.m. as we are every week. And yeah, get organised.
Bye.